sent me the list of websites, I looked at them and I thought, it's a lot, but I'll get to that later. But what I really thought was, somewhere in here, I'm going to get a picture of what the cultural heritage of New Mexico is. I did. I got bits and pieces, but I didn't get a satisfying. This is what it is. That could be a goal. I mean, that could be what you want to do. And there's lots of things in that, come down from that. The Getty, which was probably, in some ways, comparable to you. It is, the Getty is, or was then, 7 programs. Each program had a director, and each program got its budget from this umbrella organization called the Getty Trust. The umbrella organization called the Getty Trust never quite figured out what its role was. Was it a unifying element? Was there something called the Getty? What were the relationships to the various programs? The question always came up, is there something here at the Getty that we could think of as helping manage cultural heritage? And all the programs participated in that. The question would come up, and then everybody kind of looked at their shoes, and that would be the end of the meeting. What I want to do is to look at the Getty, as, at least from my experience, as one of the most dysfunctional organizations when faced with the opportunities of information technology and the kinds of communication and all the stuff that it can give you. In 2001, this all started in 2001, 3 years after the Getty Center opened. The trustees complained to a guy named Steve Roundtree, who was then the chief operating officer, that the websites of the Getty and everything that the Getty had online was a mess. And you couldn't get from one website to another. Each program had its own website. There was probably some other ones that popped up. And they said, and you can't tell what the Getty is about. And what I wanted to say was, well, Steve, how does that differ from reality? But because in the online environment, everything comes together in a way that forces you to re-examine these questions. I mean, it doesn't make you answer them one way or another, but it really makes you re-examine these questions and say, okay, well, what is it? What is it that we're about? There were 8 separate websites, one for each of the programs, and one by the Getty's Central Office of Communications. And the communications office was, because they were sitting there under the president, said, oh my gosh, we got to have a unified web presence. And so what they did was build yet another website that pointed to all the other 7. But because it had no content, nobody ever went there. They just went to one of the websites of the programs, and so it didn't really solve the problem. It was just like sort of a digital Band-Aid. No one program knew what the others were doing in terms of acquiring technology or acquiring applications or acquiring IT staff to support all of this stuff. No one in one program or another knew what the other programs were doing in terms of acquiring domain names. Who owned Getty.edu? Who owned conservationinstitute.getty.edu? I mean, and hundreds of variations. Getty.com, Getty.org. Everybody wanted to have everything that was Getty, which was problematic because there were lots of other Gettys in the world, people and institutions, but never mind that. And nobody knew who was in charge. When things went south, when something failed, when there was a 401 error, when you clicked on something and the thing that was once there, even within these program sites of the Getty, no one who knew who to point to. And so they all pointed to the IT staff and said, why don't you guys fix this? This is a technology problem. Why don't you guys fix this? Well, the IT staff had no idea what was going on because they weren't involved in the development of any of the websites. So 7 websites, 8 altogether, done with significant redundancy in staff, technology, and cost. There was no museum website. I explained that earlier this morning because we just haven't done one yet. And the museum shop at the Getty decided that it was all about e-commerce. And so the museum shop went to Yahoo. Well, it wasn't Yahoo stores yet; it didn't exist. But the early 2000 version of Yahoo stores, and set up an e-commerce site, unbeknownst to anybody else at the Getty, because they said we're going to increase our revenue streams, and so we'll just put all of our product online, and away we go. And so there was this. Well, so you know, and you trip across these things, and nobody really knew what was going on. In 2001, then this all came to the head, and this was, and so then the president of the trust. So the board is breathing down his neck. He doesn't know what to do, so he goes to the information technology department and says, "You got to help." And so the IT department created a 9th website, which was this one, which was no different from one the communications and PR office invented, but they somehow thought it was going to work better. It didn't, but it did nothing to solve the problem. It was simply a Band-Aid on the surface. And a lot of this was because we had not talked about how are we going to organize for opportunities in information technology. Not how are we going to manage technology, not how are we going to manage servers and networks, but how are we going to organize for the opportunities for us as programs in reaching audiences, in making resources available for teachers, for researchers, for people who want to come and visit the museum. We had no place to talk about that. And each of the programs assumed that they were in charge of the Getty's website. And so for each of those program sites, there was a little sort of sub-site off on the side explaining the structure of the Getty Trust, and that there was a board and all that kind of stuff. None of it was very interesting. And so what happened was this. We had to break some eggs. The board was essentially asking us to make an omelet, and we had individual eggs in an egg carton. This was a terrifying moment for me. The president of the trust came to me and said, "We've got this problem. Will you fix it?" And I said, "Why would I do that? Why would anybody go there?" We talked about that for a while. Finally, I said yes. So, you know, we essentially said we want to have a single web presence for the Getty because the board wants it, and because there are lots of synergies in terms of program. There are lots of synergies in terms of the use of information technology. There are lots of good reasons to do this. But what that meant was we had to disassemble staff that already had thought that they were in charge in their own programs and budgets. And it was big numbers. And we created a central web group that was divided into a content group and an IT group because information technology really didn't want to let go of the pieces that they had been handed. And more importantly, it meant that we had to have a single discussion about what's the Getty brand, how do we organize for this, how do we set up programs that deal with priorities, how do we connect this back into the technologies of the various programs. And those were really hard conversations. It's really hard to go to a director of a program who thought that he or she was responsible for the brand of that program and say, well, you know, there's a bigger issue here. We want to do this in a way that allows you as much autonomy as possible, or really a distributed publishing model, so that you control content. But there are certain things that we need to bring into the middle. And that discussion about what's in the middle and what's in the programs was really difficult. What wound up in the middle was the Getty brand. The Getty brand now belongs to the General Counsel's office. What wound up in the middle were supportive technology, so that we weren't redundant about that. Services like finding things on the Getty website, searching, optimizing for Google. I mean, we could get people to do these things that the individual programs simply wouldn't have thought of for themselves.